What if the life you're trying so hard to hold on to is a life you have already outgrown? And I don't mean that suddenly you hate your life. I mean, what if you still love parts of it? What if you are grateful for it? What if what you once prayed is exactly this? And yet, somehow, somewhere inside you, something has changed. You don't feel the same anymore. The things that once excited you don't. The conversations that once fulfilled you feel different. The version of you who wanted this life feels distant. And then comes the guilt. But I asked for this. I worked so hard for this. How can I want something different now? Maybe that's the conversation we need to have today. Because sometimes the hardest thing isn't getting what we want. Sometimes it's accepting that we have become someone who wants something else. The life we once wanted. I think we rarely talk about how much identity gets attached to our dreams. When you spend years wanting something, it stops being just a goal. It becomes part of your identity. You tell yourself, this is the person I'm becoming. This is where my life is going. When I get there, I will finally feel happy, safe, successful, loved, complete. And then one day you get there and something feels different. Not necessarily wrong, just different. And that's confusing because we expect disappointment when we don't get what we want. We don't really prepare ourselves for the strange emptiness that can come when we do get it. Maybe you wanted the career, the relationship, the house, the financial stability, the recognition, the family, the lifestyle, whatever it was. And yet you find yourself sitting quietly one evening thinking, is this really it? And immediately another voice says, don't be ungrateful. And I think that's where we need to pause. Because gratitude and growth are not opposites. You can be grateful for something and still know that it no longer fits you. Gratitude doesn't mean permanence. We have turned gratitude into an obligation, as if being grateful means we have to stay. If something once saved you, you're supposed to keep it forever. If someone once helped you, you're supposed to remain the same person around them forever. If a career once gave you purpose, you're supposed to keep wanting it. If a particular version of your life once made you happy, you're supposed to remain loyal to that version of yourself. But my friend, life doesn't work like that. Think about childhood. You had clothes you loved, games you couldn't stop playing, friends you thought you had have forever, favorite subject, a favorite food, a favorite dream. And then you grew up. You didn't sit down one day and formally announce, I hereby release my attachment to dinosaurs, coloring books, and playgrounds. You simply grew. And what once fit didn't fit anymore. Adulthood is no different, except now we outgrow something and there are consequences. There are bills, relationships, families, reputations, expectations, people who have known us for years, and suddenly growth feels selfish. There's something interesting about human beings. We don't just become attached to people and places, we become attached to identities. I am the responsible one. I am the successful one. I am the caretaker. I am the person who never gives up. I am the one who keeps the family together. I am the person who has everything figured out. These identities can become psychological anchors. And when we begin changing, the brain sometimes interprets that change as danger. Because familiar doesn't always mean healthy, it simply means familiar. So you may know that something isn't working anymore, but still feel safer staying with it. That's why people sometimes remain in situations they have they have emotionally outgrown, not because they don't know, but because knowing and acting are two completely different things. You can know something has ended and still be emotionally attached to who you were when it began. And there is another reason we stay. We think about everything we have already invested in it: years, time, money, energy, emotion, sacrifice. And we think, I have come this far. I can't start again. But here's the uncomfortable question: are you staying because you still want this life, or because you don't want your past investment to feel wasted? Because sometimes we spend another 5 years protecting the 5 years we have already spent, and that doesn't bring those 5 years back. It simply adds five more. Your past isn't wasted just because you choose differently now. Remember, those years still taught you, they shaped you, they gave you memories, they gave you information about yourself, they helped you become the person who can make today's decision. Thinking about this differently, maybe some dreams are meant to be permanent destinations. Maybe some dreams are just bridges. They take us from one version of ourselves to another. Maybe you wanted a particular career because you needed to discover your capabilities. Maybe you wanted a relationship because you needed to learn what intimacy meant to you. Maybe you wanted to be successful because you needed to discover your ambition. Maybe you wanted independence because you needed to discover your strength. And once the lesson has been learned, you may not need to remain in the classroom forever. And that's not failure, my friend, that's completion. And perhaps this is one of the hardest things to accept. Sometimes something can have been right there once for you, and something may not be right now. Both things are true. But what about the people around us? Now, here's where it actually gets complicated. Because sometimes your old life isn't just yours, other people are invested in it too. They know you as that person. They remember the version of you who wanted those things. So when you change, they may ask, what's happened to you? You were so happy before. Why aren't you satisfied now? You have everything. And sometimes they genuinely don't understand because they are looking at your life from the outside. They're looking at what you have. You're feeling what it costs you internally. And those are two very different perspectives. You don't need everyone to understand your evolution before you're allowed to evolve. Sometimes people are uncomfortable with your growth because it changes the version of you they were comfortable with. And that doesn't automatically make them bad. But it does mean you have to decide, am I living my life, or am I maintaining someone's image of me? The difference between growth and escape, let's talk about it. I also want to be very careful over here because not every desire to change means you have outgrown something. Sometimes we simply want to escape discomfort. Sometimes we are bored. Sometimes we are overwhelmed. Sometimes we are comparing ourselves to someone else's life. Sometimes we are chasing novelty. And sometimes we genuinely need to stay and work through something. So, how do you know? Maybe ask yourself, if nobody knew about my decisions, would I still want it? Because that's a powerful question. Because sometimes we don't want the new life. Remember, we don't want the new life, we want the validation that comes with having the new life. Another question that you should be asking yourself is, am I moving towards something or am I only running away from something? Because there is a difference between I don't want this anymore and I know what I want instead. You don't always need to know the complete answer, but there should eventually be some curiosity about what comes next. The grief about outgrowing yourself. Let's talk about that. Here's a part that I think we underestimate. Outgrowing a life can involve grief, even when the change is good. You can grieve a version of yourself. You can miss who you were. You can miss the certainty you once had. You can miss people you no longer fit with. You can miss the dreams that no longer feel like yours. And that doesn't mean you're making the wrong decision. Sometimes grief is simply evidence that something mattered. We don't have to turn every ending into a victory speech. Sometimes we can just say, that was that was beautiful for the person I was, and I'm grateful. But I'm not that person anymore. There is something incredibly freeing about being able to say that without anger, without blame, without rewriting the past, but asking, who am I becoming? Because if all you do is dismantle your life, you can end up sitting in the ruins wondering what happened. Growth needs direction, not a 5 year plan, not every answer, just a direction. Maybe you're becoming calmer, more honest, more independent, more creative, more courageous, more selective about where you spend your energy. Maybe you're finally becoming someone who doesn't need to explain every choice. Maybe you're becoming someone who doesn't confuse being needed with being loved. Maybe you're becoming someone who can say, this doesn't work for me anymore without needing to turn it into a war. That's becoming. And it's not always dramatic. Sometimes becoming looks like a quiet decision that nobody else notices. So I want you to pause for a second. Think about the life you have right now and ask yourself honestly, what part of my life am I maintaining only because it once made me happy? Not because it makes me happy now, not because it's healthy now, not because it's meaningful now, but because it used to be. And then ask, if I met myself today for the first time, would I choose this life again? That's not a question meant to make you destroy everything. It is a question meant to make you look, really look without guilt, without nostalgia, without fear. You don't owe your old self forever. And there's something I have been learning myself. This is something I keep telling myself. We spend so much time trying to keep promises we made to our younger selves that sometimes we forget to listen to the person we have become. Your younger self made decisions with the information they had at that time. They wanted what they wanted for a reason that made sense at that time. And maybe you still honor that person, but you don't have to let them make every decision for the rest of your life. You're allowed to update yourself. Your dreams can change. Your definition of success can change. Your relationships can change. Your priorities can change. Even your idea of happiness can change. And perhaps growing up isn't just becoming more certain about who you are. Maybe it's becoming comfortable with the fact that who you are will keep changing. So, so what if you outgrow the life you once prayed for? Maybe you don't need to feel guilty all the time. Maybe you don't need to convince yourself that the old life was terrible. Maybe you don't need to prove that the new life is better. Maybe you simply need to acknowledge it was right for me then. It taught me something, it gave me something, and now something in me has changed. And maybe that's enough. Because the goal of life isn't to remain loyal to every version of yourself you have ever been. The goal is to keep becoming. So today, ask yourself one question: am I holding on because this is still my life, or because I'm afraid to become someone new? Pause. And maybe don't rush to answer it, sit with it. Because sometimes the most honest answers don't arrive when we are searching for them. They arrive when we are finally quiet enough to hear ourselves. This is Silence Between Coffee, and I will see you in the next conversation. Until then, be gentle with yourself.